Hi, Zandy. One of the challenges for any of us responsible for leading teams and projects is just overcoming the sense that we're just barely keeping our head above water. In between work and life, it just feels like there's this overwhelming volume of things that we have to juggle. And you've probably heard this before, right? Like, what's the reward for good work? More work. And over time, our to-do lists grow and our time to work on them seems to shrink. And the result can often us feeling overwhelmed or out of control and maybe even burned out. So I'm constantly on the lookout for ideas to help us get a healthier view of what productivity means and how to achieve it. In this episode, I'm excited to introduce you to one of the best new books on that topic. Laura Mae Martin is Google's productivity expert. She coaches top executives at Google on ways to manage their time and energy, and she's bundled the lessons into a new book entitled Uptime, a practical guide to personal productivity and well-being. In today's episode, Laura will share a perspective on productivity that I think is different from how we often think about it. You'll learn about the 5 C's of productivity and about a construct that she calls the list funnel. We'll talk about procrastination and learning how to say no and so much more. It's a conversation I can't wait to share with you. But first, if you've been listening for a while, you know about our course, AI Made Simple, right? It's a practical guide to using AI in your everyday work. Reviews keep coming in about how people are finding it helpful. AI Made Simple shows you how to apply today's AI chatbots on day-to-day use cases, and it's a rare week that we don't update the course to help you keep up with the constant changes that are going on. If you'd like to stay ahead of the curve in the fast-changing world of business, AI Made Simple is a great next step. Learn more and join us at ai.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Laura about her new book, Uptime. So, Laura, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this. We'll get into the ideas in the book in just a bit, but first, I'd love to know more about your backstory. When you were growing up, were there signs that young Laura Mae would someday be one of these leading voices on productivity? What do you think?
That's funny. A lot of people ask me, like, how did you get into productivity? Did you read all about it or study it? And I always tell the story of my sister, who's actually an incredible baker. I am not, but I was baking with her, and she was, individually paying attention to each cookie. And I was like, it would be much faster if we did iced, and then sprinkled. And she was like, that's ruining the art of it. I see what you're saying. That would take less time. So yes, I think that those signs were there, just how I was looking at, schoolwork and managing my time in college and, all of these things that came by. Just how can I do the best with kind of putting in the minimum amount of effort of what I want to put in so that I can use my time to do other things I want to do. So
yeah, I love it. I love it. So I think we often think of, this has been a productive day when we can look back and see we checked off a lot of things off our list. So I'm curious, any aspects of the way we've typically looked at productivity that either kind of drive you crazy or you just found aren't as effective?
Yeah, I think for some reason, productivity, maybe it was like the assembly line era. It kind of became like, what's the output? What's the output? Number of sales calls, number of code written, and I think at a micro level that can still be helpful to measure. But when we're thinking about overall productivity of a person, so, the book has that title, Personal Productivity, we're thinking about longevity, avoiding burnout, creativity, innovation, and those aren't necessarily boiled down just into how many sales calls did that person output that day. And so I think that taking more of a macro view on productivity and thinking, how is this person operating and how are you operating, is the new way that I like to look at it. And so I start a lot of my, when I do speaking events, I ask people to close their eyes, think about the most productive day they've had in a long time. Then I have them open their eyes and I say, raise your hand if it was a day when you binge watch TV all day. And, nobody raises their hand because that's just not really our idea of productivity. But I argue that if you said, hey, I really want to relax this Saturday, I have a show I'd like to catch up on. You made time for it. You watched the show, you relaxed while doing it. And, at the end of the day, you were like, that was time well spent. I accomplished what I wanted to do. That was a productive day, even though, we're thinking of TV as being not necessarily the list check off type of productivity. So, it's more about intention, execution, those types of things. And that's how I try to redefine it in the book.
It cracked me up because I think that's on the first page of the book,
Mhm.
isn't it? That story.
Yeah.
And I've shared that with a handful of people, and they're like, oh, yeah. I don't normally think of binge watching and having my husband take the kids away to grandma and grandpa's, and that's a
Exactly.
productive day. But yeah, yeah. So I think that aligns nicely with one of the messages I got from your book is that when intention matches action, it's productive. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about that and how that aligns with the term uptime.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't feel productive because they feel like their time is not their own and I meant to do this today, or I don't really want to be in all those meetings, or I've really been meaning to spend more time on this. And so, we are busy, which one of the big principles I talk about is busy is not productive. Busy is
Mm.
not important. Those that's different. And so you can be doing a ton of things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're productive. So I think one of the biggest piece of it is setting aside, what do I actually want to focus on? What are my priorities? What do I intend to do? Even if that is just binge watch TV or whatever it is that you're focusing on at the time. And then when the action matches that, you feel that you were productive because you actually decided what you wanted to spend your time on, and then you did that and you did it well. And so a lot of the book talks about, how do you decide what you should do that day, that quarter? What are you focused on? How do you say no to other things and make sure you have the time to focus on that? And I think that's kind of the biggest first step versus just bumbling around and what comes up and, oh, I don't know what I'm doing today. And then your time becomes everyone else's that way.
Yeah, that feeling reactive all the time and just you're not in control. And you know, I'm a sucker for a good framework. You introduce us to the 5 C's of productivity in your book, and people need to read the book to get the whole thing. But one of those C's is calm, and I just thought this was interesting because I often think of calm as something you achieve when you've closed the loops in your terminology, right? So it's at the end. But if I understand your process right, you start with calm, which I think is a little bit counterintuitive. But why is it strategically put up front?
Yeah, because I think that, especially with the title being uptime, which is when a computer runs at its operational effectiveness, it's on. A lot of people think, and so that's what the book is. How do you achieve that state? And so a lot of people think of it as the opposite of downtime. So, that's the different time when I'm not doing something, then I'm relaxing, and that's not productive. But in the book, I talk about how the downtime is actually extremely important to the uptime. It's a full circle that you need to hit. And so again, when you talk about creativity or ideas, those are not coming to you in the other parts of that circle when you're closing loops or when you're really heads down, or you're on your 10th meeting of the day. That's not when you get your best ideas. When I ask people when they get their best ideas when I'm doing my coaching, the answers are almost always in the shower, walking my dog, on my commute, sometime when you've let your brain rest, those calm moments. And so I believe the key to some of this bigger picture creativity, vision, that longevity of productivity is really that those calm moments that you let yourself have that downtime. And so when you start with calm, it kind of snowballs from there because that idea comes to you. I want to give it to that client. Okay, I'm moving to the next C, which is capturing that idea, and on until you're closing the loops. And then you have, to your point, I think it's a circle. So once you have closed those loops and you feel like, wow, I'm really on top of it, I'm in uptime, I'm going to give myself that permission to go on another walk with my dog or take that time for myself. And so, it's this nice little circle that flows. But I certainly think you need to start with those down moments to have some of those inspirations and big ideas that you push forward later.
Yeah, you've got a quote in the book. I don't remember if it's a Zen thing or whatever, but it's like if you don't have 10 minutes to meditate, then you need 20 or something like that. And one of my things this year is I'm trying yoga, and I'm not a very flexible person, and I can't. I'm at times that I'm in this pose. I'm like, seriously, does it have to be this long? Like seriously, and so I feel like. I'm just, whether it's how I'm wired or just how we're conditioned to think this is not productive, and yet it's those times on a bike ride, or it's at times on a walk, or it's that time when you're just, whether it's meditation or prayer, it's like you're quiet and it's like ideas come, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's so easy to discount that. And I think your book makes a great case for it. And I think one of the challenges for a lot of us is learning how to say no, which you talk about in your book Uptime. So I'm curious, what's an example of something you said no to lately that maybe you would have normally said yes to, but you practice your own book? So, and
Yeah.
how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was a recovering say yeser, which I talk about in the book. So I think that, gives some credibility because some people are just naturally really good at saying no and it's hard for them to teach that skill. But for me, that was a lot of feedback that I had gotten from managers and, performance reviews that you need to learn how to say no. And so that was, things that I had developed. So in the book, the reason I say a practical guide is because I wanted to give like actual recipes for making these things happen, like literal sentences that you can copy and paste into an email when you get a request. So, something I said no recently to is I was asked to do a big speaking event, with a lot of books and a lot of people, and it was on Halloween of this year. And it was an awesome opportunity. And one of the tactics in the book I talk about, which is about connecting with future you, which is also something I talk about in the book. But actually, like closing your eyes and imagining yourself in the situation where you say yes, and then imagining yourself in the situation if you said no. And so, I actually imagined myself like leaving my kids that are all under 5 and very excited about Halloween still, the morning of Halloween saying, have fun, guys, like send me pictures. Or I imagine myself like with my kids knowing that the conference was going on and how upset am I that I'm not there. So that was one of my tactics, like deciding. And I talk about in the book even like giving it a few days to really let it settle, because you normally your gut reaction or your knee-jerk reaction isn't your gut. You need to kind of like wait that out. So I said I need to think about it. I kind of imagined those situations and just totally imagined that I would be way more upset going than I would not going. And so, once I had that kind of real assurance because I had thought that way, I had to decline and just know that other opportunities will come. And that was something I was going to unfortunately have to say no to. So, the book talks a lot about those different scenarios you can use and words you can use and ways you can say no and feel good about it.
For example, do you have in your chapter on boundaries, you talk about the words I don't, as opposed to something like I can't, which I thought was brilliant because I've got a friend he's a Chicago public school teacher. And during the summer, there's often this, hey, come in for this. And what he says is, I don't work over the summer. And that it's not I can't, because if it's I can't, well, how about the next week, right? So that's an example. I assume you even had a table there of phrases very specifically that you can say. So is that it? I don't instead of I can't or whatever. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah. I think not only I don't, in that case, that one's really good, but I actually, and I talk about in the book, like to flip it onto I do. So for example, my family photographer, I really wanted her to do the weekend because my kids have school in the mornings and stuff. And she didn't say I don't shoot family photos on the weekend. She said I do my family sessions on Tuesday and Thursday. So that was such a great way of her setting the boundary without having me be disappointed, because now I'm just thinking like, oh, she does it Tuesdays and Thursdays. My mind just goes to what she does do.
right?
I do take meetings between 8 and 5, not I don't take meetings at 7. So I feel like you can move from I can't, even better is I don't, even better is I do, and now you're just reminding them when they can access you, and it gives that positive feeling around it.
I like it. It's still almost like maintains relationship, doesn't put a barrier there. Yeah, I like it. Yeah. I feel like a lot of voices on productivity mention lists, right? Get it out of your head, onto a list, right? But I don't recall anything about a list funnel until your book. So how do you like to explain this idea of a list funnel to people that you're coaching?
Yeah, I think that this is something that I was doing for years and years, and then started, like, I've tested it out, and at Google, so many people use it now. And so I really wanted, again, I like books, I like productivity books, but sometimes when they're like so big picture, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do like tonight? Like, how am I supposed to put this into practice? Like, what does this look like? And so I really wanted something tactical in there about keeping track of those action items, because when you're making those calm moments, you have better ideas. Then like you can only do what you can do when you pull that idea down and execute on it. And so I think people make lists all the time, and to-do lists are very popular, but it's kind of like, if I want to do something over the next year versus something that I need to finish today, or I have something that I need to do, but I can't get to it until a certain day, or I put something on my list today and then I didn't finish it, how does that all work together? And I think the idea of the funnel is just like, you need to have a list of every possible thing you could be doing, but that's not the list of things you're going to do today. And that's a quick way to overwhelm yourself, is just by constantly writing like big picture things you might want to do on your list. And one of the downfalls of productivity is having things you want to do and no idea when you're actually going to do them. It just kind of creates that sense of like overwhelmment. And so the list funnel is a way of you taking those big things you want to do, or little things, with less timelines, and funneling it down into what am I going to do this week based on what my schedule looks like? What am I going to do today? All the way down into like an hour by hour contract, which is just over and over shown to make you more accountable. Like if you write down, do this at this time, your brain now doesn't have to make that decision at that time. It's like, okay, 10 o'clock hits. I said I was going to work on this presentation. I'm going to do it. So the list funnel chapter really walks through like, how do you use a list? How do you use it on a weekly basis? How do you get a new idea into it? How do you cross things off of it? And how do you keep that mental safety of everything I have to do is somewhere in the right place where I'm seeing it on a regular basis? I'm never thinking, oh gosh, I really need to do that. I didn't get to it. Like you're checking in on it so you don't have that feeling.
I'm just envisioning, because I've read the book, but people listening to us haven't yet, but they might think, but Laura, that's not how my day works. It's filled with urgency. But you actually talk about having urgent time blocked out, which once again, I'd never heard people talk about that. So would you mind mentioning that for those who feel a little skeptical that this would work?
Yes, I mean, over years and years of coaching, especially with executives, I obviously get that a lot. Like, wow, it's great that you have priorities and intention and you set this perfect time, and then boom,
Neat
the world
idea.
blows up. Yes, exactly. So, I'm sensitive to that. And I think especially people who know that about their job, that's a blessing, because what you can do is, in the say no chapter, I even talk about how to say no because you might have something urgent come up. Could say, hey, I like to keep my schedule clear because a lot of times issues come up, from the morning. So I always have the afternoon clear, whatever that is. Like, you're getting ahead of it, knowing that they're going to come. So one executive I talk about in the book, he has an hour blocked every day for urgent things that come up. And it's kind of like halfway between East Coast and West Coast time in the US, because that's, when things kind of trickle down to him. But it's so publicized now that even his team knows, like, oh, this came up and it's urgent. We have to block our calendars because that's when he's going to make the time to talk to us. And we have to have everything sent to him by then, and then he's not blowing up his schedule for the rest of the day. And if nothing comes up, it's great as work time. But, he knows that his role is to address those urgent things. And so, like anything else, you've got to make time for that. And so there's a handful of tactics in there, not just that, about kind of like getting ahead of urgent before it gets you.
Yeah, right. That's good. I a while ago, I stopped using a to-do list and almost more like a Kanban board, something like almost like overall backlog, and almost like the short-term backlog of what I'm doing and done. And I think I could actually, after reading the book, I think I can have I think you call it your main list, and then is it the weekly? And I think I could take that idea still, and it's just a modification. It's not on paper. Although I think you say in the book you use paper, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I've even taken some like videos on my Instagram of me like making this list, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, you work for a digital company." Of course, I have digital lists, but there's something about pen to paper for me, and so like at least once a month, I make that main list. I use colors, like make it fun, something I want to look at. And what you're doing sounds very similar. Like, you're going from like all these things down to like a little bit less, and down to what you actually have to do and what you have time to do. And I think that exercise helps you say, okay, I keep putting these things on my daily list, and then I'm slamming myself with meetings. And then when do I actually plan to do these things? It's kind of like a check with yourself. Like, am I being realistic about my schedule and my to-dos, or am I just going to have to end up doing everything at night, which isn't sustainable? And so it's just like a way to make sure that you're being realistic as well.
Yeah, I like it. So I've heard there's two types of people: those who procrastinate and those who lie about not being a procrastinator. So given the right set of circumstances, we can do that. So I'm interested in some ways that you personally, try to avoid procrastinating. Like, what are some things you do to try to avoid that?
Yeah, I talk about some of the examples in the book, but like just Yesterday I'd been meaning to make these muffins, and like I had bananas that were going bad, and I was like, oh, I just keep not doing it. And so one of the things I talk about is kind of like separating the prep of something and the doing of something, and like
Mhm.
being your own assistant,
Yeah.
and it kind of helps you get over that mental hurdle. And so I just said like, okay, instead of making the muffins tonight because I was tired, I didn't want to do it, I was like, I'm just going to set out everything to make the muffins. So I set out the blender, the muffin tins, every ingredient, and I felt like I'm not making them, so it's not a big deal. I'll get the cinnamon down and a baking soda. And I set them out. And then the next morning when I got downstairs, it like was just enough to get me over that hurdle of making them. Cause I'm like, oh, everything's out and I have to clean it all up anyway, and I made it easier on myself. So I think like that's something I wanted to get across is like, there's big picture ways of looking at procrastination, like are you doing the right work at the right time, but at the end of the day, like we all have those moments where like, oh, we just do not want to do this, and those are little hacks to help you get through that feeling.
I think, do you call it Swiss cheesing? Do I
Oh
remember this
yeah.
from the book? It's
Yeah,
like,
I talk about that as well, just like poking the holes in it, the big picture thing that you don't want to do. So if you keep putting build this presentation, build this presentation, build this presentation on your list and it's just not happening, try putting something else on your list that's a smaller hole poked out of that. So,
yeah,
open a presentation and title it.
right.
Make one slide. Now your brain thinks, oh, I can do that. And as we know, so much of the getting things done is that first energy, that activation energy, or it's called a lot of
Mhm.
things. But so anything you can do to make it smaller, 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 until your brain says, yeah, I can do that. And then by the time you've made a couple slides, you've moved through it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's the equivalent of taking the cinnamon out. Let's just do that part of it. Or yeah. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that you included some ideas about where to do the work, because I feel like a lot of time management focuses on is about what and when. But any favorite lessons about the where and how that matters?
Yeah, I think the concept of state dependency has always been like so fascinating to me. And that's people who are part of my coaching or trainings. A lot of times they'll come back to me and say that one thing kind of like changed their
Hmm.
flow and their ability to find, what I call uptime. But thinking about the fact that your brain takes in so many different signals than just what you're doing, what it smells, what it sees, what it feels in that spot. And I think this a huge highlight was on this when we moved to working from home for the pandemic, and people were saying, I just can't like slip into work as easily at home. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, because you've been primed with all these things when you get to your desk at the office, your favorite mug, your commute, et cetera, et cetera. And then your brain is like, all right, and now I work. And so we didn't have any of that at home. And so what you can do is think about what type of work you do in different places and make those different. So I always send emails when I'm sitting, in this chair at my office. I always commute, or I always do, calls on my commute. I always code when I'm at this spot in my home office, or whatever that is. And your brain just starts to associate those spots and sights and sounds and everything with that activity. And then you start sitting in that chair and you go right into writing emails. And that's why a lot of authors write their entire books sometimes sitting in the same chair in the same coffee shop, because even that smell of coffee gets them back into those characters, and things like that. So I think that you can use that really to your advantage.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. When I interviewed Dr. Robert Cialdini, the influence guy, he said he writes different if he's at a coffee shop versus on a university campus. Like you live very close to one of the most beautiful campuses, really, at UNC, and it's one of those things that it signals something different. And so we really ought to think about where are we doing this work at. I think it's a neat idea. And I think you said your hubby, he is more of a, do you call it outfielders? Like he works better when he's at work as opposed to home. Do I remember that?
Yes, yes. He's like, I like working from home because I kind of like set up all those things for myself. But
Yeah.
when he is fully remote, and he had to figure out, okay, how do I, like, my brain is not doing well with the sight sounds of home. And so, now he works a lot at the coffee shop or a
Right.
library or a co-working space. And so, just figuring that out about yourself. And like you said, it can be all the way down to like, he's a lawyer, and he's like, I actually do better like comparing contracts when I'm in this type of setting
Hmm.
versus reading, things that I need to edit this type of setting. So, the more granular you get, the more you can kind of like ride that out to get your best output.
Yeah, that's so good to reflect on. A lot of people listening to us either use the Gmail and Google Calendar or Outlook, one of the two. Can you think of a couple features that many people either don't know about or they don't use enough that if we just knew about that, it might help us be a little bit more productive.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing I talk about in the book as well is keyboard shortcuts. I just
Mhm.
live and breathe those. I think a lot of people sit behind me and say, "How are you working so fast?" And, obviously we talked about productivity is not just how fast you're working, but that
Mhm.
certainly makes a big difference. So if you're using a product like your email program and you learn just, a couple of shortcuts, that's going to shave a lot of time off of what you're doing every day. So just taking that time up front, I talk about how at UNC I had to do that for like a spreadsheet program, and I have never forgotten those, 15, 20 years later. I'm still using those shortcuts that I took the time to learn for an exam. And can you imagine the time those have saved me over all those years? So
Yeah.
the keyboard shortcuts in any program, really, really helpful. In Gmail, and I'm not sure if this is an Outlook, but there's a feature called Auto Advance that's in the settings. It allows you to go on to the next email once you've read one without popping back to the main inbox.
Hmm.
And so in the book, I talk a lot about, treating email like your laundry, and we can go more into that. But, instead of being able to kind of like see all your email and thinking, I don't really want to touch this one, or I'm having decision fatigue, so I'm just going to nitpick around. Auto Advance says, no, you're going to the next one. You're going to the next one, make a decision. You're going to the next one, like blindly putting your hand in the dryer and just picking out the clothes and then addressing them. So I love that feature. I always recommend people turn it on because it gets rid of that, like I'm fishing in my inbox, which can create a lot of inefficiencies.
I for years I didn't even know about like snooze and archive, and
Mhm.
use a different way, I think, to get them out of there. But even sometimes just little things like that, right? Just to get them out of your inbox. Would you say you tend to, and no pressure to sound better or worse than you are, but would you say you tend to have less than 50 unread email at the end of the day? Would you have more or less? I mean,
Oh yeah. I
in
mean,
terms of in your primary inbox, let's say.
yes, I clear my inbox every day. I live
Yeah.
that like inbox zero life, and I talk about that in the book, like how to do that. And inbox zero doesn't mean I've addressed everything. It means that I've looked at everything once and told my
Yeah.
future self what to do with it. That's
Yeah.
my version of
Right.
inbox zero.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, I have all of those little features in our products and email. I was like, these are so delightful. And, everybody who finds out about them, it changes, like just even changing the color of a label and snooze and all those things. So on the Google Workspace YouTube channel, I have like over 100 of those like little tips, and I told them I wasn't going to make videos unless they were less than a minute and 30 seconds because that's like the max that I would watch.
Right.
So I was
Yeah.
like, they got to be quick, they got to be helpful. And so that's gone on for like 5 years. I've been filming those, so if you like those, you should definitely check that channel out.
Yeah, I'll put links to those.
Yeah.
Laura, there's so many things that we could talk about, but let's end with this question because we have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast, and now your kids are quite young, so you're not like teaching them about keyword shortcuts yet. But can you think of any ways that parents can help kids learn or apply some of the ideas in your book about
Yeah, that's a
productivity?
great question. I think that, for example, we talked about the email thing and
Yeah.
kind of like taking all the email you have that feels overwhelming in your inbox and breaking it down into, this is the things I need to respond. This is the things I need to read, not necessarily reading them all. That's kind of how I just taught my 5-year-old daughter about cleaning her room, because she would kind of get overwhelmed. Like, I don't know what to do with all this stuff. I can't clean it all. So I said, we're just going to make piles. You can make a pile of all your books, even before you put them in the shelf, all your dress up clothes, all of your headbands. And then like, I will come with you and we'll, hang your clothes, hang, and we'll get really good at it because we're doing it all at the same time, batch tasking. And so, she really likes that idea. Now she's like, okay, if I can't finish my whole room, I'll just make piles of everything. And so, that's like another small thing. And we like to look ahead for the week. I think they really like that. And kids love to like know what's happening, especially toddlers. They like to be in the know. And so, they like to look at it. We have a little calendar with magnets that tells them when they have soccer and these types of things. And then every morning they like to look at that. And so, I'm essentially helping them create like that daily list, that hour by hour plan, at a different level, but they like to know what's going on and get excited and think about it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a beautiful family. You have pictures on your website. It's I think I suppose the best thing we can do is model, right? And you're modeling as the way that you and your husband live. But I think that construct of the what would future you want to do? I think that's an interesting thing that could work with teenagers. It could work with I don't know if it would work with a 2-year-old,
I don't
but
know. they have a hard, they're more of the now type. But
Right,
I
exactly.
certainly think, when you're talking to 12-year-old, 13-year-old child, what would 23-year-old you hope that you had made these decisions in high school? And like just constantly thinking as that future person is so helpful when it comes to decisions and prioritization and making sure you have breaks where you need them. Like sometimes I'll look at my calendar in a couple weeks and be like, wow, future me is going to be very mad if I leave that there. I gotta like get some stuff off. I gotta reschedule, leave myself that breathing room. So the better you get at planning for future you, the more that you keep reaping those benefits as you live your life.
And, I joked about the 2-year-old, but I think when I was 22, I wasn't thinking that way. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah,
I think to the degree we can kind of get that sort of habit of thinking, it's a
right.
win for all of us. And let me just say, for those listening, this discussion is barely even touches what's in Laura's book. There's so much more there. If you'd like to tap into the ideas that are helping leaders at Google be more productive, get a copy of Laura's new book, Uptime. I put links to the book's website, the Google Workspace YouTube channel, in
Yep.
the show notes for this cast. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.